So let's start the same way we've started with the other couple of sessions. I would invite you to find a comfortable seat or a comfortable position. It doesn't have to be a seat, whatever's going to enable you to become fully present and grounded in this moment. And I would invite you to turn your attention to your breath, to notice the rise and fall of your chest and belly and back. And you might find that your breathing changes when you turn your attention to it. And that's okay if it does, but there's no need to force any change. You don't have to deepen or lengthen your inhale or your exhale. It's enough simply to notice. Breathing in and breathing out. Grateful to be alive this day, this moment. And if you're not grateful to be alive this day and this moment, that's okay too. And I would invite you to turn your attention now to your body, to notice the feel of your body in this moment, in this space. Can you feel your feet wherever they are? Or your hands? Can you feel your ears if you turn your attention there? Can you feel your neck or the backs of your thighs? And what does your body feel like in this particular moment? Do you have any sensation, anything that might be called pain or fatigue or tension or excitement or whatever it might be? And if you do have some kind of sensation, can you locate it within your body? Does the feel of it change if you turn your attention on it? With your attention on whatever sensation you may be feeling, notice if you can gently release that sensation. And if not, that's okay too. It's enough simply to notice. I invite you now to turn your attention to your spiritual body. I like to think that the body is in the spirit. We often think of the spirit as this little point of light or some breath or something within the body, but maybe the body is actually inside the spirit. With your attention focused on your spiritual body, notice if there is any place there that is catching or drawing your attention or speaking up loudly. See if you can turn your inner gaze on that point that might be making a little more noise in your spiritual body. And again, see if you are able to simply release whatever might be holding your attention, whatever might be keeping you from full presence in this moment. And if you're not, that's okay too. In this place of presence, I offer you a poem from Hadewig of Brabant, who was a Beguine in Belgium. All things are too small to hold me. I am so vast. In the infinite, I reach for the uncreated. I have touched it. It undoes me, wider than wide. Everything else is too narrow. You know this well, you who are also there. So our topic today is, or our talk today is called A Religion of Beauty. Before I get to that, our meditation reminded me, though, when I said, it just came very naturally to me to say grateful to be alive. That comes to me, I just tell you this because you might find it amusing. That comes to me from a yoga teacher I had when I was in college, who would have us in these poses and then tell a long story of like 5 or 10 minutes long, and we're standing there like dying. And she'd just drop into the middle of it, grateful to be alive. And I often try to remember that, or it often comes to me when I'm in a moment of sensation that I don't want to be feeling, that sometimes the sensation is a reminder that I am alive. So today we're talking about a religion of beauty. I get from a lot of people, and you may even be one of these people, that they are spiritual and not religious. It's certainly a common theme in popular culture, and certainly around topics like the conversations we've been having over the last few days. That people, more and more people, I think, are calling themselves spiritual but not religious. And I understand the distinction that people are making when they say that. I think a lot of people feel disengaged with or disempowered by institutional religion. And there's certainly a lot to be turned off by in institutional religion. We certainly know from the history of Christianity that Christianity has done, as an institution, the Christian church has had a greatly negative impact in many people's lives and on the whole history of our planetary community. And yet, more and more, I find that I want to be and find myself becoming more religious. And perhaps less spiritual, more religious and less spiritual. The word religion, so I'll tell you what I mean by that. The word religion comes from the Latin religare, which means to bind together or to bind together again. And so remember when I said yesterday, for those of you who were with me yesterday, that God unites and evil divides. So religion is meant to be whatever binds us back together, whatever remembers us. You know, when we talk in the Eucharistic prayer about do this in remembrance of me. We have a priest nearby here who always emphasizes the do this in remembrance of me. And it's a helpful reminder to me that the word remember means to bring back together, to unite. So ideally, that's what a religion, a religious institution, but whatever we practice as our religion, is meant to bind us back together, to make us into a more whole person and into a more whole community. Now, many of our religious traditions have failed to do that. They further divided us. But a true religion is a religion that binds us back together. Now, binding is not a wholly pleasant experience. You know, we bind wounds so that they can heal, but we also are bound by community, by commitments we have made, meaning that sometimes we are constricted or restricted there. But I think that can also be a part of wholeness and healing. We make vows so that in limiting one aspect of our lives, we can be free to move more deeply and to be more whole. And ideally, that's what religion, whatever our religion is, does for us. Religion in this broader sense can also help us move away from the ethereal to the concrete, to the here and now embodied and incarnate reality of our fleshy God. You know, God took on flesh in Jesus. And I would say probably God took on flesh in all creation, you know, as we were saying the other day, pouring God's self out into the whole cosmos. And if religion is working, or if our practices, our religious practices, our spiritual practices, if you want to call them that, are working, they actually bring us more present into the moment, more grounded in the reality of our lives. And this is certainly what the practice of walking in the woods or digging in the dirt does for us as well, about being connected to the natural world, is that we actually become grounded over a course of a lifetime of engaging in that way. I know for me, one of the most wonderful things about walking in the woods is that the woods have no expectation of me. You know, I can walk in the woods. They don't care, you know, what my title is. They don't care what I did this morning or didn't do this morning. They don't care, you know, anything about my grand designs for my life or anything like that. My projects don't make any difference to the woods. I'm simply free to be without any kind of striving or explanation or expectation. Vigen Guroian is an Orthodox theologian. I think he's down at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, at least he used to be. And he's written a lot of books about Orthodox theology, but he's also written a couple of books on gardening, theological reflections on gardening. And they're really wonderful, they're short, they're beautiful, and he's in your bibliography, which I did post to the Facebook page and to our website, by the way. So check out the event page for this retreat on Facebook or on our website, and you'll find a link to the bibliography. But in his book, Inheriting Paradise, which is one of these collections of garden meditations, he puts it this way: when I garden, earth and earthworm pass between my fingers, and I realize that I am made of the same stuff. The human being is a microcosm in whose flesh resonates and reverberates the pulse of the whole creation, in whose mind creation comes to consciousness, and through whose imagination and will God wants to heal and reconcile everything that sin has wounded and put in disharmony. When I garden, earth and earthworm pass between my fingers, and I realize that I am made of the same stuff. The human being is a microcosm in whose flesh resonates and reverberates the pulse of the whole creation. So it's in our encounter with the rest of the created world, that not only are we religioned in and of ourselves, but we are religioned with the rest of the cosmos, really. We can come to recognize that I am dust, both the dust of the earth around me and the dust of the stars above me. You know, we're all made of the same stuff, ultimately. And in that sense of the prodigal God squandering God's self at the creation, we're also all made of God and in God. I think there's no better way to engage in this kind of religioning or unifying of ourselves and the rest of the world than in the encounter with beauty. So yesterday we finished up our talk on a high note with that beautiful quotation from Rebecca Solnit about joy as a fine initial act of insurrection. And I think another way to practice joy is to practice beauty and to awaken ourselves to the beauty within and around us all the time. Beauty has the power to draw us outside of ourselves, and at the same time to ground us more fully in ourselves. I had a friend in seminary who was a bit dramatic, and every time he thought he'd met the man of his dreams, he would say, "Oh, he conveys me to myself." And, you know, as over the top as that might be sometimes, that phrase is so powerful, to be conveyed to oneself. I mean, I think we all have had those kind of experiences before, where suddenly in an encounter, whether it's a solitary encounter in prayer, whether it's staring at the Hudson River, whether it's having a conversation with a loved one, or reading a book, we have that experience of being conveyed to ourselves, that in that encounter, we somehow are more fully ourselves than we were beforehand. And how did that happen? When we stare into the face of someone or something who is beautiful, time slows down, as does any sense of separation, of distance, any subject-object relationship. Suddenly what we are staring at is not different than we are. Or if it remains other than we are, there's often a confusion in those encounters with beauty between who is staring at who here. You know, when you look at a piece of great art that really moves you, you sometimes have the sense that, oh shit, that painting is staring right back at me. And I thought I was staring at the painting, but the painting is really staring at me. This is people who pray with icons. That's the sense of what's happening with an icon, if that's a form of prayer that works for you. To realize that there's this intelligence beyond us that is also staring right back at us in those encounters. In the encounter with beauty, we become one with that on which we gaze, and we find that actually it's gazing right back at us. Subject becomes object, and object becomes subject. And how else would you call contemplation, really? I mean, we talked about the long, loving look at the real in our first session together. That's what happens in those encounters with beauty, with the beautiful. I think it's also important to point out that there is an ethical dimension to beauty. So, you know, in the beginning of Genesis, when God creates the heavens and the earth and calls them good, right? The same word that is translated good can also be translated as beautiful. God created the heavens and the earth and called them beautiful. God created humankind and it was very beautiful. They were very beautiful. God created you and called you very beautiful. And so there's this sense, I think, in the kind of joining together of those words, that what is beautiful has a quality of goodness about it, that the beautiful is inherently good, and the good is inherently beautiful or attractive. And that's often one way that we can know in our discernment what is the right course to take, what is the good in this situation. It's what is beautiful. Now, I think it's important in this moment to say that's not the same thing as, the beautiful is not the same thing as the glamorous, right? You know, those very glamorous people to whom we feel attracted, they may have something beautiful about them, but we may often be attracted to glamour. And so, you know, there is some discernment that we need to engage in those moments. It's not to say that glamour is not something we might want to have an interaction with, but it's not the same thing as beauty. Beauty is usually very specific and concrete. Beauty is, I don't know why this is coming to me right now, but the example that's coming to me is I was at this museum probably 10 years ago, and I saw this old woman across the cafe from where I was sitting, and she had these deep, deep, deep wrinkles in her face, and I mean, I can see her face clearly right now in my mind's eye. And there was such character in her face. And she was not by any glamorous standard attractive, if you will, but she was incredibly beautiful. She had one of the most beautiful faces I have ever seen, and I can remember it to this day. You know, beauty is steeped in detail. And I thought, oh God, I want to be a photographer or an artist, you know, someone who can draw so that I can capture this particular moment right here. So I said just a moment ago that when we lose ourselves in beauty, it's not only that we are finding something good, but also we are found in those moments. We are conveyed to ourselves. And not only are we found, as in located in the particularity of who and where and when we are, but we're also found to be good enough, to be beautiful enough, just as we are. There is an undeniable wholeness in that encounter with beauty. And that wholeness is really what we might call the goal of the Christian life. John Cashin talks about purity of heart as the goal of every Christian life, purity of heart. And really what he means by purity, we might say wholeness of heart. To have our hearts, which have been broken by all of the things that have happened to us and through us and around us in the world, that darkness we were talking about yesterday, to have our hearts knit back together again so that they can beat with God's blood, they can love with God's love. That's the goal of the Christian life. Wholeness of heart, loving God with wholeness, being loved, and loving others in that same way. If beauty is if beauty is grounded in particularity and detail, I think it would be good to share with you a few examples of what I'm talking about. These first two come from Marilynne Robinson, who is a novelist and theologian. And these are both from her book Gilead, which won the Pulitzer Prize maybe 20 years ago now. It's the story of an aging Presbyterian, no, maybe he's congregational, anyway, an aging minister in this small town in Iowa, and he has a 7-year-old son, and he realizes he's going to die before his son comes of age. So he starts to write this long letter to his son all about his life, so that his son will know something about him. And at one point, this is what he has to say. I have been thinking about existence lately. In fact, I have been so full of admiration for existence that I have hardly been able to enjoy it properly. As I was walking up to the church this morning, I passed that big row of oaks by the war memorial, if you remember them. And I thought of another morning, fall, a year or two ago, when they were dropping their acorns thick as hail almost. There was all sorts of thrashing in the leaves, and there were acorns hitting the pavement so hard they'd fly past my head. All this in the dark, of course. I remember a slice of moon, no more than that. It was a very clear night or morning, very still, and then there was such energy in the things transpiring among those trees, like a storm, like travail. I stood there a little out of range, and I thought, it is all still new to me. I have lived my life on the prairie, and a line of oak trees can still astonish me. I thought, it is all still new to me. I have lived my life on the prairie, and a line of oak trees can still astonish me. I just find that passage to be so evocative and so telling of what happens in the encounter with beauty. John Ames, the character who's saying these words, in looking at this line of oak trees, is made new again. It is all still new to me, he says. He and the world around him are reborn in that moment. The word becoming flesh again, right there in that moment. And it's not that anything about in those moments when we encounter beauty, it's not that anything about the world has changed, actually. It's something about us has changed. There is an unveiling, which is the literal meaning of the word apocalypse. And we're able to see in that moment the world as it really is, shining constantly with God's glory. And like this character here, those moments astonish us. There's a childlike quality to these encounters and to the delight that they can raise in us. And actually, paradoxically, it's people generally, I find, who are much older, who are able to recapture that childlike sense. We seem to developmentally to have that when we are children and then to somehow lose it. And it is the process of entering and deepening our spiritual lives that allows us to recapture that childlike engagement with the beautiful things of the world. In another point, this character continues in a similar vein when he says, I feel sometimes as if I were a child who opens its eyes on the world once and sees amazing things it will never know any names for, and then has to close its eyes again. I know this is all mere apparition compared to what awaits us, but it is only lovelier for that. There is a human beauty in it, and I can't believe that when we have all been changed and put on incorruptibility, we will forget our fantastic condition of mortality and impermanence, the great bright dream of procreating and perishing that meant the whole world to us. In eternity, this world will be Troy, I believe, and all that has passed here will be the epic of the universe, the ballad they sing in the streets, because I don't imagine any reality putting this one to shade entirely, and I think piety forbids me to try. In eternity, this world will be Troy, I believe, and all that has passed here will be the epic of the universe, the ballad they sing in the streets, because I don't imagine any reality putting this one to shade entirely, and I think piety forbids me to try. I almost hate to comment on these passages because they speak so beautifully and poignantly on their own. I think this sense that Robinson is able to cultivate here of the beauty of this world we live in and the wonder it is capable of evoking in us when we really, really look at it. This is why our tradition, not just the Christian tradition, but many religions, many religious traditions, are so insistent on the maxim that we need to stay awake. Wake up, wake up, wake up. And we get that wonderful refrain all through Advent of sleepers wake. You don't know when the Lord will come. Because the truth is, God is already all around us and within us, and we don't know when that moment of unveiling will descend upon us. And so we have to be awake so that when it happens, we're ready for it. Though I think the truth is we're never actually ready for it. It always astonishes us when it happens. In those moments, we see that the distance between heaven and earth is pretty much non-existent. It's all it is the distance that our imagination allows us to bridge or not, that our sight allows us to bridge or not. A friend of mine, Suzanne, who's at least been on the last couple of these, and she may be here right now, talks about, I think she says that the Ascension, the Feast of the Ascension, is her favorite feast, if I'm remembering the story correctly, because at Christmas, the Word becomes flesh, and at the Ascension, flesh becomes Word. The flesh becomes Word. We certainly talk about Jesus ascended far above all things that he might fill all things. And we have this sense that having ascended into heaven and taken flesh into heaven with him, that the Word is everywhere. The Word is all around us. And that forevermore heaven and earth are united entirely together. There is no separation between us anymore. I have one other example for us. I might actually keep it to 45 minutes today. One other example of the transformation that is possible over the course of a lifetime engaged with the beauty of the natural world This comes from Thomas Merton. The great gift that Merton has given to all of us is that we're able to track through his journals and through his writing. He obsessively documented his life. And so one of the great gifts he's left us is that we're able to track the course of spiritual development in a person who has been deeply faithful in prayer and in struggle and in community life, and to see how a person can change over the course of a lifetime. So I have two selections from his journals here. The first is from 1950. They're both from January, but the first is from 1950. And he's writing about solitude. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is what he has to say about solitude. Give me just 1 second here. I'm going to get us all muted again. So he's writing about solitude, and he says, "It is in deep solitude that I find the gentleness with which I can truly love my brothers. The more solitary I am, the more affection I have for them. It is pure affection and filled with reverence for the solitude of others. Solitude and silence teach me to love my brothers for what they are, not for what they say. It is no longer a question of dishonoring them by accepting their fictions, believing in their image of themselves, which their weakness obliges them to compose. Yet there will, it is true, always remain a dialectic between the words of men and their being. This will tell something about them we would not have realized if the words had not been there." One of the things that I always comment on when I'm using this passage with people is that he says, it is in deep solitude that I find the gentleness with which I can truly love my brothers. Well, yes, isn't it much easier to love other people when we're by ourselves? Solitude can make it easier than living in community to love other people. It's when we're in community with others that we all want to be hermits. But the point really that I want to draw our attention to in this reading of this passage is that this is Merton not super early in his time in the monastery, sort of midway through between the time he entered the monastery and the time he died. And he's written this reflection that is frankly so dense and so centered in the mind that it's not that you can't get anything from it, but you really have to sit down and read it and pay attention to it and dissect it and understand what he's trying to say. And compare that with this second reading from 1968 from his journals, shortly before he died, within a year of his death. He writes, "It is turning into the most brilliant of winters. At 6:45, stepped out into the zero cold for a breath of air. Brilliance of Venus hanging as it were on one of the dim horns of Scorpio. Frozen snow, deep, wide, blue-brown tracks of the tractor that came to get my gas tank the other day when everything was mucky. Bright hermitage settled quietly under black pines. I came in from saying the psalms of the little hours and the rosary in the snow, with my nose in pain and sinuses aching. Ears burn now in the silent sunlit room, whisper of the gas fire, blue shadows where feet have left frozen prints out there in the snow. I drank a glass of dry sherry and am warm. Lovely morning. How lovely life can be." Do you notice the difference between those two passages? In the first one, it's all, it's overworked in a way. It's very mentally focused. It is a lot of projection onto these brothers of his, and a lot of effort. There's a lot of effort in the first passage. It's about who he wants to be and who he wants his brothers to be, and a lot of theological meaning making. In the second passage, it is so specific. It is so grounded in the reality of the physical world. It's so beautiful and simple. And you have this sense that there's no effort in him at that point. That over the course of those 20 years, just about between 1950 and 1968, something has happened in him, and he's able simply to be with this beautiful world around him. Without, and there's nothing in the second passage about God. He never mentions God, but he doesn't have to, because God comes forth so strongly in the encounter he has with this beautiful world, just as God comes forth so strongly in those passages from Gilead. Just as God comes forth so strongly when you're sitting outside staring at a beautiful sunset or a flower or the face of a person that you love. There's no need for words at that point, because the beauty says everything that needs to be said. I think that is the move, in some sense, from spirituality that is often, ethereal and otherworldly and up in the heavens, and a religion that is grounded and knits us together, makes us whole again. To finish us off here, I want to leave us with a poem that I hope summarizes everything that we've been talking about in the last 3 sessions. This is from Simeon, the New Theologian. He was a 10th century mystic, and he wrote some incredibly beautiful poetry. This is what he has to say here. We awaken in Christ's body as Christ awakens our bodies. And my poor hand is Christ. He enters my foot and is infinitely me. I move my hand, and wonderfully my hand becomes Christ, becomes all of him. For God is indivisibly whole, seamless in his godhood. I move my foot, and at once he appears like a flash of lightning. Do my words seem blasphemous? Then open your heart to him, and let yourself receive the one who is opening to you so deeply. For if we genuinely love him, we wake up inside Christ's body, where all our body, all over, every most hidden part of it, is realized in joy as him, and he makes us utterly real. And everything that is hurt, everything that seems to us dark, harsh, shameful, maimed, ugly, irreparably damaged, is in him transformed and recognized as whole, as lovely, and radiant in his light. He awakens as the beloved in every last part of our body. I'm going to turn off the recording now, and then we can have a time for questions and reflections.